The question came without warning, the way the most important questions always do. Ethan Marsh was sitting in the waiting room of Weston Capital, 14th floor, Chicago, his 7-year-old daughter Lily beside him, when the CEO walked out of her office, looked at Lily, and stopped cold. Not the polite pause of someone surprised by a child in a professional setting, a real stop, the kind that has nothing to do with manners. Then Claire Weston looked straight at Ethan and said, in a voice entirely level, entirely serious, "Why does your daughter look like me?" Ethan placed his hand on Lily's shoulder. He exhaled once. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "Because her mother looked like you, and her mother is dead." Ethan Marsh had not always been the kind of man who carried silence around with him the way other men carried wallets or keys. There was a version of him, not so long ago by the calendar, and very long ago by every other measure, who laughed too loudly at bad jokes and drove with the windows down in November and called his wife from the hardware store just to ask if she wanted anything, knowing the answer was always nothing and calling anyway. That version lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Pilsen, southwest of the Loop, where the rent was something a young electrician could manage, and the neighbors held the elevator for each other and left baked goods outside doors around the holidays. He had been building toward a contractor's license in those days, and he had a whiteboard in the spare bedroom covered in projections that Sarah made fun of gently because she said his handwriting was illegible and his math was optimistic. He had a plan. Most of the plan was Sarah. She was 28 when they married. She worked as a paralegal at a small firm downtown, one of those offices that still had the original brass fixtures in the lobby because no one had ever found a reason to change them. She was organized without being rigid, and she had a way of entering rooms that made people turn toward her without fully understanding why they had turned. Her hair was the color of winter wheat. Her eyes were a shade of green-gray that shifted depending on the quality of the light, pale in the morning, deeper by afternoon, something close to green in the last hour before dark. People remarked on her eyes. Ethan had noticed them first and gone on noticing them every day for 7 years, and had never once stopped finding it remarkable that 2 eyes could hold that many colors at once. She could spend an entire Saturday afternoon reading without speaking, which Ethan had found alarming at first and come to understand later as one of the things he loved most about her. She was self-contained in a way that was not coldness but completeness, as though she had arrived in the world already knowing what she needed. She made her own granola. She had strong opinions about coffee temperature. She laughed only at things that were genuinely funny, and she never laughed at things that were not. And after a while, Ethan realized this was rarer than it sounded. They chose the name Lily before they knew whether it was a boy or a girl, because Sarah said it worked either way, and Ethan said that seemed right, and that was the end of the discussion. The pregnancy was unremarkable in all the ways that matter. Sarah went to her appointments, read the books, made jokes about the books, and was, in the particular way of a woman who has decided something is going to be fine, quietly and firmly convinced that it was. The birth was not fine. There were complications the doctors had not anticipated and could not, in the urgent hours that followed, fully control. Sarah held Lily for 11 minutes. Ethan could still account for every one of those minutes, the weight of a daughter in arms that had not held a baby before, Sarah's face doing something he had never seen it do and has not seen since, a kind of exhausted radiance that seemed to belong to a different order of human experience entirely. Then the nurses moved with purpose, and Ethan was asked to step back. 3 days later, he was standing alone in a hospital corridor with a daughter who weighed 6 pounds and 4 ounces and a future that felt like a room with all the furniture removed. He did not cry at the funeral. The crying came later, in installments in the car after daycare drop-off, in the kitchen at 2 in the morning waiting for a bottle to warm, on the highway home when a song came on that Sarah had liked, and he had to pull over for 4 minutes before he could see clearly enough to drive. He paid it off slowly, across years, and was not certain he was finished. Sarah had no living family. Her mother had died when Sarah was in college, a stroke, sudden and complete. Her father had left when she was 4 and had not returned in any form that counted. She had no siblings, no cousins who appeared at events. She described herself, with a matter-of-factness, Ethan had always found quietly heartbreaking, as a person without a past. Not sadly. The way someone might describe the weather. "This is what I am," she would say. "I came from somewhere, but I do not know where, and that is fine, and here I am." After she died, Ethan had tried to trace her background through public records for Lily's sake, for medical history. He found Sarah's mother's death certificate. He found a birth certificate listing the father as unknown. He found her mother's last name, Weston. He had not thought much about the name. It was not an uncommon name. Blood had left no trail he could follow. He told Claire all of this, standing in the waiting room, Lily sitting beside him looking at the Chicago skyline, with the composed attention she brought to most things. As he spoke, he watched something move in Claire's face, a small, specific tightening around the eyes, the kind that happens when a fact arrives and requires a person to quietly reassemble several things they thought they understood. Her hand, holding a pen she had not needed, tightened slightly. "Sarah used her mother's last name," he said. "Weston. I never thought much about it." Claire looked at Lily once more. Lily was tracing something slow and absent on the armrest, unconcerned with any of it. "I realize this is an unusual conversation to have in this context," Ethan said. "Yes," Claire said, distantly, not unkindly. She picked up the folder from the reception desk, said she would be in touch, and walked back through the inner door without finishing the sentence she had started. In the hallway beyond, she stood still for a moment. Then she took out her phone and called her mother. "Did Grandma Rose have a child before she married Grandpa?" she said. When Helen picked up, "A child the family never talked about." The pause that followed was 2 seconds long. Not long, except that the honest answer required none. "What a strange question," Helen said. "Where is that coming from? Just answer it." "I am not sure what you mean." Claire ended the call. He was hired 3 days later. The official explanation communicated through HR was that his qualifications were strong, and the position had been open for 2 months. Both were accurate. Neither was the reason Claire had flagged his file before the review was complete. She told herself it was due diligence, that she owed it to herself, to the possibility she was wrong, to understand what she was looking at before she acted on it or dismissed it. She did not examine these explanations very carefully, because she was, among her many competencies, skilled at not examining the things she was not yet ready to examine. He started on a Tuesday. He arrived 7 minutes early, left at the scheduled time, and did not linger. He wore gray work pants and a company polo, and carried his tools in a bag that had been used for years and showed it. He spoke to the operations manager with the easy authority of someone who understood systems, and had no need to perform that understanding for an audience. Within his first week, 2 electrical panels on floors, 9 and 11, that had produced inconsistent readings since the previous spring were functioning correctly for the first time in months. The operations manager noted this in an email with the restrained satisfaction of a man who had learned not to celebrate things working the way they were supposed to. Claire read the email and forwarded it to facilities without adding anything. She found reasons to observe him at distances that could be explained by other purposes. He ate lunch alone in the operations break room, food from home in a container clearly packed that morning. His phone sat face up on the table beside him, and when it lit with notifications, the screen showed Lily a summer picture, bright and slightly overexposed, Lily mid-laugh, losing a race against a melting popsicle. Claire had noticed it from across the room one afternoon, and had not been able to fully account for what she felt when she saw it. She had filed the feeling away. She had not entirely believed this. She passed through the operations corridor one Wednesday with the facilities director, asking him a question she already knew the answer to. Ethan was working on the secondary panel near the service elevator, replacing a component with the absorbed concentration of someone for whom this work was entirely clear. He looked up when she passed. He gave her the brief, professional nod of someone who acknowledged the organization's structure without being particularly moved by it. She asked him about the component. He answered completely, correctly, without flattery or performance. Then he waited, and when there was nothing more, he turned back to the panel. She walked to the elevator with the facilities director talking beside her, and heard none of it. She was thinking about the way Ethan had gone back to his work without checking whether she was still watching, without any self-consciousness. He was simply working. and the work was what it was, and he had no interest in making it into anything else. She found this harder to stop thinking about than she would have preferred. She tried twice more in the following week to find excuses to pass through his corridor. On the third attempt, she stopped halfway down the hall and turned back. She was not entirely sure what she was doing. She was quite sure it was not due diligence. What she was sure of was that Ethan Marsh was not what she had expected. She had expected someone who needed things, someone visibly worn down, visibly in want of something that employment and proximity to her might provide. That was not who he was. He arrived, he worked, he left. He brought his own lunch and ate it without complaint, and was back at his station before the break was over. He was polite to everyone in the building in the uncomplicated way of someone who had decided courtesy cost nothing and dispensed it accordingly. The operations staff liked him. The maintenance crew liked him. The woman at the loading dock, whose name was Patrice, who had worked at the building for 14 years and who notoriously liked no one, stopped by the operations corridor twice in Ethan's first week, on a pretext so thin it was almost translucent, and both times came away looking something like satisfied. Claire noticed all of this. She was good at noticing things. She was considerably less practiced at not doing anything with what she noticed. There was a morning, a Wednesday, in early November, when the cold had finally arrived, and the city outside the windows was the color of slate, when she was in the elevator going down to the lobby for an 8 o'clock meeting, and the doors opened on the 6th floor, and Ethan stepped in. He was carrying his toolbox. He was also carrying a small paper bag with the logo of the bakery 2 blocks east that Claire happened to know because she went there on the rare mornings she gave herself time to go anywhere. He saw her. He nodded the same nod he always gave her, brief, professional, without subtext. Then he stood on the other side of the elevator and looked at the floor indicator. "You go to Marta's," she said. He glanced at her. "The croissants are good." "They are," she said. The elevator opened on the lobby. He held the door for her. She walked out first. They went in opposite directions, and Claire spent the first 12 minutes of her 8 o'clock meeting thinking about absolutely nothing that was on the agenda, which was not something that had ever happened to her before in a professional setting. 3 weeks after he started, on a Thursday evening when the floor had mostly emptied, Claire sat alone in the small conference room at the end of the hall. On the table in front of her was a photograph that had arrived by courier that afternoon, black and white, old enough to carry that particular softness that aging images have, the edges of things bleeding slightly into adjacent tones. A young woman in her early 20s, standing in front of a house with a wood-railed porch, looking slightly away from the camera. Even at an angle, in faded monochrome, there was something in the structure of her face that Claire could not look away from. She had hired the investigator 3 weeks earlier. The woman worked out of Lincoln Park, asked precise questions, and sent her report on a Sunday morning. Claire had read it once, gone for a run, come back, and read it again. Sarah Marie Weston, born 1989 in Carbondale, Illinois. Mother listed on the birth certificate as Margaret Calloway. Margaret Calloway had been born in 1961 in Lake County, Illinois, and had been surrendered for adoption as an infant. The original birth record, obtained through a genealogical petition, listed the birth mother as Rose Calloway, age 19, unmarried. Rose Calloway, who had later become Rose Weston by marriage in 1964, who had lived in Lake Forest for 30 years, who had died of a stroke when Claire was 10, and whose photograph hung in a silver frame in her mother's front hallway, and who was spoken of in the family with the precise, careful reverence reserved for people who can no longer complicate anything by their continued presence. The conference room door opened. Ethan stood in the doorway with his toolbox, clearly not expecting anyone to be there. He took in the situation in one quiet beat. "Sorry," he said. "Operations said this room needed the overhead panel. I can come back tomorrow." "You do not have to," Claire said. Her voice came out less managed than intended, not broken, just unguarded. "I was finishing up." She did not finish up. He set his toolbox near the door, opened the ceiling panel, and worked without making it into anything a man doing his job in a room where someone else was also present, giving her what privacy the space allowed. After a few minutes, without looking down, he said, Are you all right? It was not a social question. It was direct and unangled, the question of someone who actually wanted to know the answer. I am not sure, she said. Okay, he said, and went back to the panel. She looked at the photograph until she heard him close up and pick up his toolbox. Before he reached the door, she said without having decided to say it, I need to tell you something. Not tonight, but soon. He stopped. All right, he said, and left. She called him the following evening. She asked if he had time to talk. He named a coffee place on West Randolph, and she was there first, sitting with black coffee, when he arrived 3 minutes later and ordered the same. She told him everything. The investigator's report. Margaret Calloway. Rose Calloway. The adoption sealed in 1961, the chain of events that connected them, through 40 years of silence, to a woman named Sarah, who had spent her whole life believing she came from no one and had in fact come from a family that simply never knew she existed. He listened without interrupting. Very still, the way a person is still when they are holding something that requires care. When she finished, the quiet between them lasted several seconds. The cafe moved around them, the sound of the espresso machine, a table of women laughing about something, music at a volume no one could quite identify. Ethan was looking at the table, and Claire watched him think. So Sarah and I are related, he said, distantly, 2 generations removed. Sarah would have been my mother's first cousin, once removed. My second cousin. She never mentioned any family. Not once in 7 years. She may not have known. The adoption was sealed. It is possible Sarah went looking at some point and found the same dead ends you found. He nodded slowly. She would have looked, he said. She was someone who would look. He paused. She used to say she was a person without a past. Not sadly. She never said it sadly. She said it the way you would say any plain fact about yourself. This is what I am. I came from somewhere, but I do not know where, and that is fine. And here I am in front of you. He looked up briefly. I thought that took a certain kind of courage. I still think that. Claire said nothing. There was nothing adequate. She would have wanted to know, he said. Not to make any claim or disrupt anything. Just to know that she was not actually from nowhere. That there was someone, some family, some line of people, some face she would recognize if she saw it in the right light. He paused again. That would have mattered to her. Quietly. She would not have said much about it, but it would have mattered. I know, Claire said. I am sorry she did not get the chance. It is not your fault, he said. No. But I am sorry for it anyway. He accepted this with a slight nod, the way a person accepts something true they have no need to argue with. They stayed until the cafe began stacking chairs. On the sidewalk outside, in the October night, neither of them said anything about when they would see each other next. Neither of them said they would not. 3 weeks after the coffee shop, Ethan called Claire on a Saturday morning. He said Lily had been asking questions he was not sure how to answer alone about her mother, about where her mother had come from, about whether there were people in the world who belonged to their family without either of them knowing it yet. He said Lily had a way of asking things that made you realize you had been avoiding the question yourself. He asked, carefully, if Claire had any time that afternoon. Claire said she could meet them at Lincoln Park at 2. She arrived before them and stood near the south entrance, watching the path. The park was busy the way Chicago parks are busy on a clear Saturday in October, people moving through it, with a purposefulness that had nothing to do with destination, as though the act of being outside and in motion was its own sufficient reason. Claire stood still in the middle of all of it, which she recognized as unusual for her. She was not, as a general rule, someone who stood still. When she saw them coming, Ethan with his hands in his jacket pockets, Lily moving alongside him with the purposeful energy of a child who always knew where she was going, something in Claire's chest did something she did not have a name for and did not try to name. Lily saw her from a distance and did not slow down. She walked straight up, looked at Claire with the same unhurried attention she brought to everything, and said, "Are you the person from my mom's family?" Claire crouched down to her level. She had prepared for this, in an abstract way, and found that the preparation had not been adequate. "I think so," she said. I am still learning exactly how, but yes, I think so. Lily considered this with the seriousness of someone weighing a reasonable answer to a reasonable question. Okay, she said. Then she looked at the path ahead and said, "Can we go see the ducks?" And that was the end of it. They walked. Lily moved ahead, investigating things at pond level: the ducks, a particular stick, a stone that was the right shape for keeping in a coat pocket. Ethan walked beside Claire at a pace that was unhurried, and she noticed he did not try to fill the space between them with anything. He simply walked. She found, to her own quiet surprise, that she was doing the same. There was a moment, halfway around the pond, when Lily stopped and turned back to them with something urgent in her expression. Claire braced for a question, the kind that had no clean answer, the kind that children ask in public and that adults spend the next several years thinking about. But Lily only pointed at a particular duck that was standing apart from the others on a rock near the water's edge, and said, "That one is in charge." She said it with complete confidence, and then turned back to the path and kept walking. Claire looked at the duck. It did have a certain authority about it. "She assigns roles to things," Ethan said quietly, beside her. "Always has. The oldest tree on the block is the wisest. The broken street lamp is the sad one. The duck on the rock is in charge." "She is not wrong," Claire said. He smiled at that, a full smile, not the brief contained version he usually offered, and Claire thought she understood, in that moment, something she had been trying to understand about him for weeks. He was not guarded because he was cold. He was guarded because he had learned, the hard way, that the things he loved were not guaranteed to stay, and he had rebuilt himself around that knowledge. The smile said that he had not stopped loving things. It said that he was still, despite everything, a person who could be made to smile fully at a duck. At one point, Lily ran back to show them a feather she had found, presented it to Claire specifically, and ran back to the water without waiting for a response. Ethan watched this without comment. Claire turned the feather in her fingers and felt the particular quality of being trusted with something small and entirely sincere. "She does not warm up to people quickly," Ethan said. "Not a performance of pride, just a fact, offered plainly." "I will not take it for granted," Claire said. He looked at her sideways, briefly. "I know you will not," he said. They stayed until the light began to go flat, and Lily had reached a natural conclusion with the ducks. Walking back to the parking area, Lily put her hand in Claire's without asking, the way children do when they have decided something and see no need to announce it. Claire looked down at the small hand in hers. She did not say anything. She held on. 2 weeks after the park, Ethan was doing a routine inspection in the lower garage when he heard Claire's voice through the open access panel. She was on a call in her car, 20 feet away, and did not know he was there. He was not trying to listen. He listened anyway, the way you listen when a voice has a quality that makes you stop without deciding to. She was not talking about work. She was talking about something from her childhood, a house that was always quiet, parents who were always at a remove, and her voice carried something he had not heard from her before, not vulnerable exactly, but unguarded, the voice of someone speaking without a performance running underneath it. He finished his work and left without saying anything. The next morning, he put a piece of paper on her desk, folded once, written in a careful hand. It read, "Lily wants to know if you would like to come for dinner Friday. She makes pasta. I just do the dishes." She read it twice. She left it on the corner of her desk for the rest of the day. At 5 o'clock, she wrote 2 words on the same piece of paper and left it with the operations coordinator. The 2 words were, "What time?" The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building in Pilsen, with narrow stairwells and paint that was clean without being recent, and a neighbor across the hall watching television audibly. Ethan opened the door at 6:30, and the smell that came through was tomato sauce and something that had been on the stove slightly longer than intended. Lily was in the kitchen on a step stool, wearing an apron with a cartoon lobster on it that reached her knees, stirring a pot with the complete concentration of a person performing a surgical procedure. She had not looked up when the door opened. She insisted on doing it herself, Ethan said quietly. "How close did you supervise?" "Far enough that she felt capable." "Close enough," to prevent a structural incident. Lily heard them talking and turned. She looked at Claire and said, with the directness Claire had come to find oddly steadying, "I made pasta. It might be a little burned on the bottom, but that is not the part you eat." "That is exactly the part I like best," Claire said. It was slightly burned on the bottom and entirely edible, and Claire ate every bit of it, which Lily monitored with the close satisfaction of someone who had placed a private bet and won. The table had homework pushed to one side, a library book open to bioluminescent fish, a drawing of a horse taped to the wall that Lily explained in full without being asked. A coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Dad" sat at Ethan's place. Lily said she had picked it out for his birthday, with some assistance. "I had input," Lily said. "Significant input," Ethan confirmed, with the slightly exaggerated gravity of a man who had learned the fastest way through certain conversations with his daughter was to take them entirely seriously. After dinner, Ethan washed the dishes while Lily led Claire through the apartment's points of interest. A row of rocks on the windowsill, organized by color on a Sunday afternoon, that had apparently been a project of some importance. A library book whose plot Lily summarized in complete detail, with the full assumption that Claire would find it as compelling as she did, which Claire did. A photograph from a petting zoo in which Lily was regarding a goat with a suspicion that, she explained, had turned out to be entirely warranted. "He took a button off my jacket," Lily said. "Goats will do that. I did not get it back." "Did you try?" Lily considered this with genuine seriousness. "I decided it was his now," she said. "He probably needed it more than me." There was a quality to the way Lily moved through the world, a kind of direct, unhurried good faith, a willingness to extend trust without theater that Claire found herself watching for, the way you watch for something after you have noticed it once and want to see it again. Bedtime happened with the practiced efficiency of long routine, the negotiation over how many books constituted 2 books, the glass of water, the specific arrangement of blankets that was non-negotiable. Then the apartment went quiet, and Lily's room was dark down the hall, and Claire sat at one end of the sofa and Ethan sat at the other, and neither of them reached for anything to fill the quiet because the quiet did not need filling. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "When you found out there was someone connected to you that you had never known about, was that frightening?" She thought about it honestly. More frightening was the alternative, she said. That I might not have found out. That Sarah could have existed and died, and the connection would have simply dissolved because no one knew to look for it. That seemed worse, much worse. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the wall across from him. "She would have liked you," he said, after a while. "Sarah. She did not extend that easily, but she liked people who said what they actually meant, and she liked people who showed up who did the hard thing instead of finding a reason not to." He glanced at Claire briefly and then away. "You did both." Claire did not answer. She sat with it, which was something she was getting better at, sitting with things, instead of immediately determining what to do with them. After a while she said, "I would like to keep coming, if that is all right." "Not because of the family history, just because." He looked at her then, straight, and without performance. "Yeah," he said. "That is all right." She left at 9:30. He walked her to the street. They stood on the sidewalk in the mild October night. The city at a comfortable distance, the way it gets late, when most of the urgency has gone out of things. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for asking," she said. She walked to her car. She did not look back, not because she did not want to, but because she was not yet certain what her face would do if she turned. The conversation with her mother happened on a Saturday morning at the Lake Forest house. Helen Weston received Claire in the sunroom with the composure of a woman who had been preparing for a specific conversation for longer than she wanted to admit, and who had not, despite all of it, arrived at anything adequate. Claire put the investigator's report on the table between them and did not sit down. Helen looked at it. She picked it up. She set it down. She looked at the garden through the glass. "I found out in my 20s, she said, after a silence that stretched past the point of being comfortable. "Your grandmother told me when she was ill. She said it was the worst thing that had ever happened to her, and she did not want it to define everything that came after. She asked me to leave it alone. I left it alone. Sarah died not knowing she had family, Claire said. Her voice was steady, and it cost her to keep it that way. She spent her entire life believing she came from no one. She came from us. She never knew. She is gone. Her daughter is 7 years old. That is what leaving it alone produced. Helen looked at the garden for a long time. I know, she said. The words came out smaller than usual, and Claire understood that her mother had known this, on some level, for years, and that the knowing had not made it easier. It had only made it older. I am not asking your permission, Claire said. I am telling you what I found and what I intend to do. I will not publicize anything or make any legal claims or disrupt the family in any formal way. But I am not going to pretend Lily does not exist. I am not going to pretend Sarah was not connected to us. I am not going to do that. Helen did not argue. There are conversations a person anticipates for years and rehearses responses to, and then the conversation arrives, and the rehearsed response, tested against the actual weight of the moment, is simply not there anymore. Helen looked at her hands in her lap. She looked at the garden. She did not say anything else, which was, Claire understood, its own kind of answer. On the drive back into the city, Claire called the investigator and asked her to prepare a complete, properly sourced family record, everything verifiable, kept somewhere safe. She was not certain yet what she would do with it. She knew it needed to exist. 6 months passed. Winter became spring in the slow, unreliable way that Chicago allows one warm day, then 2 cold ones, and then a stretch of pale blue weather in late March that felt like something had finally been decided. Things between the 3 of them had changed the way things change, when no one is forcing them, gradually, then decisively, then so naturally that it was difficult to reconstruct what before had looked like. Claire established a small fund through Weston Capital's charitable arm. She called it the Sarah Weston Maternal Care Initiative. It supported single parents in the Chicago area during the first year following the loss of a partner, financial assistance, logistical resources, referrals to services that were difficult to navigate alone. The announcement was brief. It said nothing about who Sarah Weston had been. Claire knew. Ethan knew. That was sufficient. Ethan was promoted to lead building systems technician in February. The recommendation came from the operations team and was processed through HR, without input from the executive floor. Claire had recused herself from the decision on the grounds of personal connection and was told afterward that her recusal had not affected the outcome because the outcome had never been in question. The operations manager, delivering the news to Ethan on a Thursday afternoon, had apparently been confused by the recusal to begin with, and had said Claire heard this secondhand from the facilities director, who was not known for embellishing that the decision was so obvious it had taken about 4 minutes, and one of those minutes was spent finding a pen. Apparently you are very good at your job, she told him. I have had a long time to practice, he said. Lily had been calling her Claire since November, not Aunt Claire, not Miss Weston, just Claire, because that was her name, and Lily saw no reason to elaborate on this further. Claire agreed with her completely. On a Saturday in late March, the 3 of them were in Lincoln Park. The sky was pale blue and cold and full of light. The lake lay silver and flat to the east. The trees along the path had the new, tentative green of earliest spring, the kind that could still be undone by one more frost, but was making its case regardless. Lily was ahead on the path, moving toward the duck pond with the focused energy of a child who had a plan the adults had not yet been briefed on. Ethan and Claire walked behind her at a pace that was slower than necessary, and neither of them adjusted it. She asked me something last week, Claire said, whether the people in her blood were good people. Ethan looked at her. I told her I thought so. I told her that her mother was brave and kind, from everything I had been able to learn, and that the family her mother came from had done some things right and some things wrong, the way families always do. She paused. She said okay, and went back to her book. She is efficient about the things that matter. He smiled, looking ahead at Lily, who had crouched at the edge of the pond to examine something in the water with the focused attention she brought to things she considered worth examining. A few ducks drifted nearby, conducting their own unhurried investigations. She is going to be all right, he said. Not a question. The statement of a man who had been afraid for a long time and had finally, carefully, allowed himself to believe otherwise. "Yes," Claire said. "She is." He looked at her then sideways and briefly, with an expression that was open in a way she had learned he reserved for things he meant fully, and had decided it was all right to show. They walked in silence for another moment, and the silence had the quality of something earned rather than stumbled into. The park moved around them, a dog on a long leash, two joggers, a man on a bench with his collar turned up against the cold, the ordinary, ongoing business of a Saturday in a city that did not pause for anyone's private history. "She really does have those eyes," Claire said. "I know," Ethan said. "I look at them every day." Lily stood up at the pond's edge, turned, and waved at them with the particular impatience of someone who expected specific people to be closer and was mildly put out that they were not. They walked toward her, into the thin March light. Claire did not measure anything. She did not calculate or hold anything in reserve. She simply walked forward, toward the small girl with the inherited eyes, who was waiting for them at the water's edge, and for the first time in longer than she could trace backward, she was not arriving at something. She was simply in it, and that was entirely enough.